Welcome back to Power and Politics. Al-Qaeda confirmed today the death of Osama bin Laden, and then they vowed revenge on the U.S. Now, the American killing of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan earlier this week raised a lot of questions. It outraged some in the Muslim world as well. What does bin Laden's death mean? Could this death lead to a rebirth of Al-Qaeda's influence? Let's take this to our higher power. Joining me from Toronto, Mohamed is the director of the Canadian Arab Federation, and Azmi Haq was the consultant to the former Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. Gentlemen, good to see both of you. Lots of fallout today. President Obama visiting the SEAL team today, saying it was a job well done when they flew into Pakistan, killed bin Laden. Al-Qaeda today saying they will retaliate against this. Azmi Haq, what does this tell us, that Osama bin Laden was hiding in quite openly inside Pakistan after almost 10 years? What does this do to Pakistan's reputation for fighting Al-Qaeda and their relationship with the West?
It puts Pakistan in a tight spot. It puts Pakistan's democracy. It embarrasses the democracy there. President Zardari, we may have issues with the way his government has governed thus far, but is known to be a friend of the Western world. His views, he lost his wife due to terrorism. So it's hard to doubt that he or his government was in the picture. But the fact of the matter is that Osama bin Laden was found in his backyard, and it makes it very difficult to defend.
What are the implications of this, Mohamed al-Rashidy? Your sense of this? Obviously, the distrust is intense between the U.S. and Pakistan. They didn't tell the Pakistanis about the raid for fear of a leak. Nonetheless, billions of dollars of aid flow to Pakistan. So, how do you reconcile those two things?
Well, of course, there will be a lot of problems in the short term for Pakistan, but I think it's important not to blow it out of proportion, as I've seen in the American media and other places, American politicians saying the Pakistani government is complicit. I don't have any sources in Pakistan. I'm not originally from there, but I get the sense that this is more about incompetence on the part of Pakistan rather than deception. And it's important to make that distinction. You know, there are millions of people within the United States today who live illegally that the U.S. government does not catch or unable to catch. So it's important to put that in perspective. And that's the greatest superpower in the world, unable to secure its borders. So I don't know why all of a sudden Pakistan, which has a much more difficult border to secure with mountains, is held to a different standard. I've been to California, Southern California, on the border with Mexico. You should see what happens there. And there are military bases within Southern California, like Camp Pendleton, right next to the border. And, illegal aliens, as they refer to them in the U.S., are always going in and out from there.
There's one difference, though, Mohammed, I dare say, that those people in California are not being hunted down by the world and by the local authorities. And here we had criminal number one with a $25 million bounty on his head, and we find them in the backyards of our allies. That is a troublesome question. Now, this also puts or brings to light a fact that Pakistan has been a good ally in many instances where its cooperation has been crucial and has been acknowledged globally. And I think that this is a moment to understand the complexity of how Pakistan is being governed and has been governed. Let's not forget that we've had a dictator there, General Musharraf's case, who was the darling of the Western world, and who played this double game, whereby he would cooperate on one day and not on another to maintain his relevance. Now is a good time, I say, that Pakistan is a low-hanging fruit in the Islamic world, which has democratic tradition, which has never voted for fundamentalists in Pakistan's entire checkered history and its play with democracy. And no matter how good or bad democracy has been there, it has never voted for fundamentalists. So Pakistan's democracy is the low-hanging fruit or the lowest hanging fruit in the Islamic world, whereas Pakistan's military has had it's complex because initially because of their doctrine of strategic ideological depth, they have been dealing with the jihadis as allies, and now they're required to undergo this paradigm shift, whereas the jihadis have become enemies number one. And so there is a system within the system, we all fear, that is not cooperating fully well yet.
There's also these questions now about the ongoing impact, not just in Pakistan, in the Muslim world in general. The U.S. not releasing the photos, for example, for fear that this creates a kind of martyr syndrome for Osama bin Laden and further fuels retaliatory feelings or anti-American feelings because of this killing. Mohamed, where are you on that?
Well, look, the United States had to get bin Laden. The fact that he was not caught for 10 years after the atrocities of 9/11 has been very embarrassing for the United States. It has definitely diminished its standing and prestige around the world. That is without question. So they had to take the step. I won't get into the details of what happened in this killing, but overall, I don't think the United States had a choice in trying to hunt down bin Laden and getting him one way or another. A lot of people would have preferred a trial and would not have preferred the bloodshed that took place, but at the end of the day, they had no choice. From the Muslim world's perspective, he was a very controversial man. You have to understand that Al-Qaeda definitely inspired a lot of people to stand up to the dictatorships in the Middle East and the rest of the world. However, Evan, you got to recall the revolutions that are taking place in the Arab world right now. They were not based on religion. They were not based on a lot of the things that bin Laden and his movement inspired, and yet they achieved their goals. So Al-Qaeda has been dealt a very severe blow prior to the death of bin Laden through these revolutions in Egypt and Tunisia, for example. So Al-Qaeda is in a very difficult spot, and their power has been very much diminished, and the U.S. can gain a lot from that. I think this action we saw with bin Laden, while necessary, will have some negative repercussions on the short term.
Azmi Haq.
Regarding the release of the photos, I mean, we live in the Western world, and one of the traditions here is of transparency, and people want to know, and they want to know what's happened, they want proofs. I mean, there's a tradition for it, and therefore I feel that at some point the real photos will come out somewhere. They would be released at some appropriate time. But the decision of not to release them now is a political call that President Obama has made. Personally, I think it's a wise call, because number one, at the end of the day, who wants to see gruesome photos? And number two, if they're going to incite a reaction either here in the Western world or in the Islamic world, which is going to be negative, those photos are not really serving a positive purpose.
Right, I agree with that. I think they need to be held at least for a while, because you don't want to inflame things further. They may be released at a later date. I don't think anything stays secret anymore these days. But I will say, though, that it does fuel in the short term the conspiracy theories, which, as you know, are very popular surrounding bin Laden and 9/11. So there is a positive and negative, but at the end of the day, they definitely shouldn't release them this soon after the news, so as to not inflame things further.
Does this have any impact very quickly on the conflict that NATO and the UN and Canada have been very much involved in Afghanistan, and perceptions about now winding that down or not?
Yeah, I think it will, and I'll let Azmi take it after this. I think it does make things a little bit more difficult. Bin Laden, in a sense, legitimized a lot of what's happening. Certainly in American eyes, it was revenge for 9/11 and trying to stop Al-Qaeda. And with the demise of bin Laden, it's going to be more difficult from a domestic point of view for Western leaders to continue these wars abroad.
I think bin Laden's death, and the way it has happened, is a huge symbolic victory. Not only for people and governments in the Western world, but also for people in the Islamic world, and especially in Pakistan. Because let's not forget that although Pakistan has this minority, but a vocal minority, which has moved to the right into extremism, and we can call them supporters or sympathizers of people like bin Laden, the vast majority has really suffered. And according to some counts, and I don't have any verification to those, that about 30,000 people have lost their lives since post 9/11 in Pakistan alone. So this is a country that's bled a lot and has paid heavily for the situation. Some of those situations were of its own making, and some were totally out of control. So I think that symbolically, number one, it's a victory. It does send a very solid symbol that, listen, you can hide wherever you want and for how long as you want, but you will meet your end.
I've got to leave it there. I should just tell you both, and I want to tell our audience, we've got some breaking news very quickly, that the United States has now told Syria that the U.S. and its international partners will take additional steps against the Syrian government if they continue to kill and harass protesters there. There's an evolving situation in Syria. What those additional steps mean, we don't know yet. But Mohamed al-Rashidy, you mentioned that, and we're following that story. Mohamed al-Rashidy, director of the Canadian Arab Federation, Azmi Haq, consultant to the former Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. I appreciate both of you coming on today. Stick around. We've got the results of our question of the day and the highlight. They're both next. Stay with us.